In astrology, we don't just have to look at the planets, we can go looking at the asteroids as well. And these unveil feminine archetypes, like the one we're exploring today. We're going to be talking about the asteroid Vesta, as well as essential oils you can use to tap into this energy and utilize it in your life. Now, talking about another divine feminine figure, Liz is joining me today. How are you, Liz?
I feel like the mother goddess is like that. Thank you. What a nice introduction.
Oh, my pleasure. Now, what's really interesting, when we look at the asteroid belt that's between Mars and Jupiter, there are hundreds and hundreds of different asteroids in there, many of them bearing the names of different goddesses and gods and so on. But it's kind of the big four that we've been focusing on. We've chatted about a couple in the previous weeks, but this week we are looking at Vesta. She's still one of the biggest in that entire belt, and she's quite a prominent goddess as well, isn't she?
Yeah, she did. Well, she was definitely the most prominent goddess in the Roman pantheon. Um, it's interesting. Well, I'm going to preface this by saying that Vesta is a goddess that I work with a lot. I decided last year that my work was getting so bizarre and there didn't seem to be anybody on earth to be able to help me to kind of manage my work. I decided, right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to work with the asteroid Vesta as my spiritual director. So as she moves from house to house, then that says to me, right, you've got to stop doing that kind of work and concentrate on that kind of work. And that means that it's not always right out there. But it's really interesting to kind of reset all of the time. And I'm going to give away our recording date a little bit. She moved into Aries 2 days ago, which was May the 12th. And Aries is my first house, which is what she does to my identity, and you can feel it very strongly because she's a lot to do with sacred identity. So going back to your question about her being a very prominent goddess, often you'll see people talking about, I work with Vesta and I work with her in the way that she was worked with as Hestia, and that is valid. So Hestia was the goddess of the hearth in ancient Greece. I think it's fair to say that she was syncretized into the Roman pantheon. Whenever they went somewhere, they said, what gods and goddesses have you got? Right, we'll collect those because we want it to make it easy for everybody. And Hestia was a really important goddess because she was goddess of the hearth and the home. And there is that element to her. Women worshipped Vesta in the home in Rome. And you'll often see hearths and little shrines around the hearth in places like Pompeii, where Vesta is um, has been worshipped. But also, there was a much bigger element to her, which I don't think you really see in ancient Greece, and that she was the goddess of the Roman state, the Roman city, the Roman institution, what it meant to be Roman, and that part is completely missing in the Greek pantheon. So she's complicated to study, but very interesting.
Mm. Now, it is interesting. It did take me a couple of moments to kind of do the mental gymnastics to work out why her role would be so valuable in ancient societies. Goddess of the hearth, the fireplace, whoop-de-doo. But when you think about times before electricity, that hearth would have been for cooking, it would have been for heating water, it would have been, they would have gathered around that. So it was that real centerpiece of the home, wasn't it?
It was, but it goes much deeper than that. If you think about, it's very hard, it's very important not to look at these things, if possible, through 21st century lenses. And if we're talking about the goddess of the hearth, and it's easier to think about her as Hestia for this, in ancient Greece, the place of the woman was in the home. She was head of the oikos of the household. She was in charge of cooking and cleaning and spinning and making sure that that everybody had clothes to wear. And she wasn't really allowed out that much on her own. People were allowed to visit her unless they were chaperoned by her husband. She so that so it's important not to think, well, the hearth wasn't that important. It wasn't just that it was a place, it was her very identity. That was a Greek woman. She was the hearth. Yeah.
Yeah, amazing. So would that be fair to say that in modern day times, Vesta would be the goddess of the television? Because everyone gathers around the television instead of the hearth now.
No, no. It would it would it, I understand what you're saying, but it's just not just about the gathering, it's about what it means to be the person that runs, what the energy is that runs the house. So closer to say it's the boiler, really. That's the central heating boiler. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so let's dive into the astrology. And what's really interesting, especially if you've checked out the new series I'm doing with the other astrologer on dwarf planets, we've got to be careful not to always necessarily take the myth and apply it exactly to the astrology, but there are some really fitting bits here. So I find with Vesta, in looking at its placement in your birth chart, you can look this up, even a simple Google of what is my Vesta sign will give you an indication. It's going to talk about a couple of things. Vesta represents your, think about that flame within. Now, how do we keep that flame going? There's a couple of different aspects of this. First of all, being loyal to oneself. I want you to think about the last time when someone else wanted something that opposed you, and you're like, oh, okay. And it kind of dampens your flame. Now, we obviously have to compromise in life. That's a given. But there are times in life where maybe we allow others to extinguish our flame a bit too much and we just lose our passion. Sometimes it may not be an individual, it's just life. You've lost your passion for life, you've lost your enthusiasm for different things because you've handed over your power to something greater. Vesta, I find in astrology is really great for helping you to go, what is my empowerment? What does ignite my passions? And this can be really quite insightful. Now, the other interesting thing is she is one of the, you can use her in love and soulmate astrology readings as well, because she does actually give a strong indication of what arouses you in the bedroom, what gets those passions flowing as well. So look at her placement, look at which sign she's in, and if you're wondering what your bedroom style is and what someone else's bedroom style is, fire signs tend to like, if she's in a fire sign, they tend to like it quite dramatic and fiery and passionate. Air signs, almost like part of what arouses them is the mental game and conversation, even talking about it. Earth signs tend to like it a bit more slow and sensual, but they also need to be very mindful not to make it turn into an obligation or a duty and to actually really lean into that part. And for Vesta in one of the water signs in the bedroom, they tend to really like, it's all about the heart rather than the physicality of it. It's that emotional connection as well. So you can really get some interesting understanding on what Vesta is bringing into your life by looking at her placement in your chart.
Really interesting to see it construed that way, because I would have said that she rules celibacy. And because her priestesses were recruited at the age of 6. They served for 30 years, and they were just not allowed to have any contact with male society at all, and they were threatened on fear of death of actually breaking their vows of celibacy. So I think I agree to a part of what you say, but I think it probably more relies on what a relationship needs to have outside of sex, if that makes sense. Like the emotional attachment, or even more importantly, the mental stimulation that gets you going rather than the bedroom stuff. So it's interesting to see that. I understand where you come from, the sacred hearth, but they had no sexuality in their life, and she had no sexuality in her life. She was a virgin goddess too.
It can be really interesting, and I'd encourage people, and I'd love to see in the comments as well, to look at your Vesta sign, look at your partner's Vesta sign, if you have a partner at the moment, and kind of do a comparison, look what kind of keeps that spark and that passion going. Yes, it can be it can be a bedroom thing, but it can also just be keeping the relationship interesting. We all get into beyond the honeymoon period, and Vesta is a goddess that you would look at to kind of extend the enthusiasm beyond the honeymoon, if that makes sense. So
Yeah, well, yeah, I do think that that she definitely has an element of continuity of the long-term endeavor. They were priestesses for 30 years, you know, and actually we have records to show that at the end of that time, even though they have their liberty, which is the word, a lot of them retook their vows and stayed there again. You know that they were in it for the long term. You know.
yeah, fascinating. Well, let's get into some essential oils that we find would work really well when you do want to connect with Vesta. So the first one that I love, because of that kind of warming nature, I'm going to go for cardamom. I think cardamom is a really beautiful one. For me, I use cardamom a lot for awakening our passions. Not just, it can be used as an aphrodisiac oil, yep, but it's also a really good one for helping us reconnect with what kind of keeps that fire going within us as well. In our cardamom video that we did when we did a deep dive into cardamom, you hear me talk about how you can use cardamom to move anger and help us move anger into something more proactive. And in a Vesta context, I think it's a really great one just for helping you to connect with that passion and what brings back your spark and your enthusiasm for life, whether it be life, love, or some other aspect. Cardamom's really beautiful in that way.
Yeah, I agree that Cardamom's lovely that way. I always say that it's like sitting under a Bedouin sky, cardamom. You sit down and you're like, look how far I've come. You know, it's lovely that way. And it is lovely and warming. And I think that the heat. So what's interesting about the Vestal Virgins is they wore a headdress. And they had a very special hairdo, which is incredibly difficult to do. But so they had like a piece of rope, and then their hair was wound back, and then they wore like a rope headband, which is called an infular, and then they had a veil covering their hair. But we know that the hair was plaited in six plaits and sort of very cleverly all wound across each other, so you had like a zigzag effect in the partings, ironically because nobody would see that, which was very strange. But they dressed the same as a bride would dress, and so you've got that sort of precipice moment of before sensuality comes, you know, that it will come soon. And so you have that sort of smoldering flame all of the time. That's the sort of main symbology of it. And I do think that cardamom has that feeling of that smoldering flame. It's not hot, it's just the coals are the right temperature. And what's interesting is one of their jobs was to judge the auspices of what would happen through auguries, so doing fortune telling based on the fire, based on when sacrifices were made. And so if the flames went way too high, then that was a really bad signal, you know, that things were going to explode, you know, things were the fire, that the battles were going to be against them, and it would be a fiery battle. But likewise, the smoke had to go up just exactly right. And if it didn't, and when you put fat onto an oil or onto a flame, obviously it goes bang. If it didn't go up enough, then that meant that Vesta had refused it. So part of the Vestal's tricks was to make sure that smoldering was always correct, because otherwise that showed, you know, if people listened to them read the auspices and heard that things were going wrong, then that was very bad. So cardamom is a good recommendation about this kind of smoldering and just keeping the heat going. It's lovely.
Mm. Now, another spice oil that I love to use when I'm working with Vesta as well is coriander seed. Coriander seed for me, a lot of the seeds, whether it be cardamom or cumin or dill, any of those seed oils, are really good for awakening potentiality. And I find coriander seed is a really great one for awakening the potentiality of yourself, almost sparking the flame of yourself as well. Coriander is a really great one for helping us come back to ourselves and remember who we are. And in a world that's always demanding us to pay attention to what they want us to pay attention to, coriander brings us back. So it's a really good one when you are working with Vesta for that. You know, like Liz was talking about before, there was too much happening and she needed to kind of recenter herself. Coriander seed is. We did a video on it recently, a deep dive. It's high in law. It's very calming. But in that calmness comes that power because we come back into our center. We know who we are. And I find working with that in harmony with exploring your Vesta in your astrology can be really powerful.
Yeah, I think that you rightly say that I find that really important to me. One of the things that when I started doing the Melissa work, I was very aware that people saw the role of a priestess very differently today, that the priestess is almost like the mystic that is able to bring through all of these different divine feminine archetypes, that they embody their power. But I've never felt that was my calling, that my calling is more in service. And nobody really seems to talk about service, but I think that's what a priestess does. She serves. And that is very much in the nature of the Vestals, that they were entirely in service to the goddess and to the state, and there was nothing else. What was really interesting to me, which has become kind of an obsession over time, was that in that the 30 years wasn't like an accidental figure. It was you spend 10 years learning how to be a Vestal, you serve for 10 years, and then you spend 10 years passing on that knowledge to somebody else. So this 10 years, I was fascinated. Well, what took them 10 years to be able to learn? And really, and I often ask this to other like high priestesses, and we've all come to the same conclusion, that it was about holding power and holding energy and being able to hold that energy really importantly. And so for me, I think Vesta is not just about coming back to yourself, it's about being able to isolate in yourself that divine purpose, and always saying, well, I do have other things to do, but this is what I feel like I was sent here to do. And so I have to give time and attention to that. And if you think that cardamom seed helps you do that, it's not an oil that I work with enough in that way to be able to say yes or no. But I think that the reason for doing it is for recommending is good.
I'm Elizabeth Ashley, UK Director for the National Association of Holistic Aromatherapy and founder of the Aromatic Mystery School, where essential oils meet the deeper, more mystical side of healing. Here you'll explore the spiritual, emotional and energetic dimensions of plants and learn how to weave them into your own rituals and well-being practices. If you're ready to work in a way that nourishes both your soul and your senses, join us at the Aromatic Mystery School. The link's right below.
The third oil that I chose, rosemary. I think we've been kind of talking about remembering what's important, coming back to who you are, being of service, and I guess kind of also fulfilling your spiritual quest. Rosemary is great for that. I love it as an essential oil here. I would use it. I wouldn't use it exclusively for Vesta, but I would bring it in as an addition to either the coriander or the cardamom in that way. What I love about rosemary is we know physically and mentally it helps with memory recall and improving the memory. But I find as a crown chakra essential oil, it's also really good for helping you to remember, why am I here? What am I meant to be doing? And again, it's another oil that kind of goes with the theme I'm referring to of staying on track and being in alignment with your path, not the path that someone else wants you to work. So I would bring in a bit of rosemary when working with Vesta as well. Wouldn't be my primary oil, but it would be a secondary or a supplementary oil.
I think that they definitely have the vibration of Rosemary. The way that I don't like Rosemary, I find her bossy. She's too much like an alpha to me. And one of the most interesting pieces of evidence about the Vestals is, excuse me, had the heater on, I've got dust now. As a herbalist, I'll often refer to the works of Pliny the Elder and what he knew about different herbs, and he'll say this plant does this. Chamomile is digestive, or rosemary is for remembrance. We'll use rosemary in that situation. And when he talks about the Vestals, he talks about them with the same authority and power. Not that people believe that they have that power, that they do have that power, and that if they can, if a slave's going to run away, they have the power to stop that person and to seize them and to make them stand still in the spot, as long as it's not outside of the boundaries of Rome. And so this idea of holding power, but also that people really recognize how powerful they were, that's a Rosemary quality, you know, that you hold that alpha, that you are very quiet, very pure. They are all about purity. They're all about quietness, but they have that power, and that was absolute in that time. So Rosemary is a really good recommendation.
I'm really intrigued to find out, because you've been looking at the oils for each of these asteroids on a slightly different approach. So you're going with the kind of medical astrology approach with Vesta as well?
Well, kind of. I have to say, I'm not 100% sure that she has medical astrology. So there is a line where people will say, well, she's the small intestine because she's ruled by Virgo, and also Virgo rules the devotion towards the way that you look after your body. I kind of get that, and I also think if I were to kind of put a head on it, I would say the closest thing I can think of that would be medical astrology from that point of view is to think about it as Ayurveda and how they think about metabolism as being the fire of Anyi. That kind of feels like Vesta to me. And so, but either of those, I wouldn't say, well, when I saw that coming into a transit, that's what I would expect. The one thing that really struck me that nobody seemed to be really talking about and seems obvious to me was repressed sexuality, and the reasons why people don't have sex. So celibacy is quite I'm going to say trendy choice. That sounds like it's dismissing it. I don't mean to do that, but there's lots of women these days who say, I choose to be celibate. I don't want to have sex with a man. That's unusual in history, I think. You know, and that was the role of a priestess before, you know, that they chose, and it's the role of a nun. So those are kind of religious choices previously, whereas a lot of women make those choices now. But I also think there are lots of reasons why you don't have sex. So you might have a situation where you say, well, sorry, I just don't want a man anywhere near me, maybe because of trauma. You know, there's lots of reasons why you might not want a man, or indeed a woman, near to you. But I think one thing that's really quite important is that sometimes it really hurts to have sex. And I think that if I were to look at medical astrology, I think that's what I would be mapping and saying, is there a situation where you physically don't want to have sex? And what's interesting is when I thought about what oils I would use for Vesta, one of the ones that came up was cinnamon. I think that cinnamon really has that feeling of real heat in the body. And when I was looking at the research into conditions like vulvodynia, where, you know, the body cramps up and physically won't let somebody inside, it's like, no, I absolutely don't want to do that, then the TRPV1 receptors and TRPV4 receptors are both really involved in that feeling of burning and pushing somebody out, and, you know, the sensation of inflammation down there can really be having like an interface from there. Well, that is cinnamon. Cinnamon does that. The other one that does it through TRPV4 is galangal, again, warming oils. So I think that would be the way that I would go to really look at the chart. If somebody had got those kind of situations, I would only do it from a reverse engineering point of view, if that makes sense. That if somebody came to me and nobody could get to the bottom of why that person can't have sex, where their body's physically going, no, I don't want to do that, or they have this emotional thing that they want to have sex and they can't have sex, then I would look and see what Vesta was doing in their chart. And that's the only way I can really see it working. I can't really see it going the other way, if that makes sense.
You mentioned one essential oil that I don't think we've actually spoken about on Fellowship of Essential Oils before, galangal. Do you want to talk a little bit about that in general terms for people's interest?
Well, it's not really one that I use very much, but I do have it in my box because it was one that my stepdad Michael used to use a lot. It's related to ginger. So if you think about ginger in terms of how it heats, it's not as strong as ginger. And one of the reasons why I thought not ginger is because of that. That's what ginger makes me feel like. I feel like I'm on fire. So that would be too strong, but it has that more smoldering aspect to it. Very good for digestive, but very good for aches and pains, rheumatism, that kind of thing.
Yeah, amazing. Awesome. Now, you hate me throwing random questions at you, but I'm going to throw one and we'll see how we go. Obviously, you've got this relationship with Hestia and her Greek name and Vesta as well. Beyond the medical astrology, because as you said, it's a bit of a harder one to pinpoint, are there other oils or plants that are associated with her that you'd ever bring in when you are working with her?
So I always use myrrh. I think that myrrh is really about devotion to sacred feminine. It has that real peaceful sentiment, and also, I mean, they are the classic examples. The other thing is frankincense. You know, to be able to engage with any kind of spiritual practice, you need to be able to go into that peaceful place that moves the brainwaves into a different situation. So boring as it seems, it would be frankincense and myrrh really for me, and just intention rather than having a specific thing. But I do always burn cinnamon.
Yeah, I think myrrh definitely resonates from what you just said then, and I can see how that works well. The other thing to consider is most years, Vesta will spend some of the period of the year in retrograde. What I find during this time, occurrences will become more prevalent in your life, where you'll start to realize that your integrity to yourself is being compromised or where it is. And so it's a really great time to kind of come back to who you are, come back to what's important to you, and rekindle that flame. So if you're kind of feeling as you watch this video that life's boring, or you're kind of not heading in a path that lights you up, if that flame within you has gone less than smoldering, it's been starting to get dampened out, that will start to happen around the Vesta retrograde. It'll become more exaggerated. This is where I'd also work with crystals such as red garnets. Are absolutely amazing for working with Vesta as well. So look for that. Bring in some of the essential oils that we've discussed. Red garnet might be a good one, and then just kind of look and work out how can I reignite that flame? How can I be loyal to myself? How can I start the fireplace within the home that is my body? How do I do that as well as bring fire and passion into your life as well? Is there anything else about Hestia or Vesta that you feel we haven't discussed that you kind of comes up in your work?
You could go on for days upon days upon days talking about it, but I think I was reflecting on what you said when you pushed me. Is it the television? I said no, it's the boiler. Actually, that's wrong. It's the oven. It is the oven. It's about that sacred nourishment in your life. And when you talk about it, you're definitely talking about it from a rational point of view, and I don't believe rational comes into it anywhere when it comes into to Vesta or Hestia, although I don't work with Hestia, I work with Vesta. But I think it's all about sacredness, the sacredness of our family, the sacredness of what I want to do with my life, that sacred part of me that you can't touch. It's very, very ephemeral and hard to describe, but it's all about what is sacred to me, and therefore what I won't sacrifice. I'll sacrifice a goat in its place, or actually it was a cow. I'll sacrifice a cow in its place, but this is what I am not prepared to sacrifice. That's what Vesta's about.
Yeah, I'm pushing back, but in the lightest way possible. The reason I gave the television example, and I kind of give it in jest, is that that's kind of what people gather around today. When you're saying, no, it's got to be sacred, I'm like, I think in some households, the television is probably the most sacred thing. So who knows for sure, but, just food for thought. But I don't seriously think that Vesta would be associated with the television. More saying that in jest. So that's a little bit about Vesta. We'd love you to pull up her in your chart, do a bit of exploration in what sign she's in. There are great resources online. There are great books as well that you can check out to understand more about that. And then come back and let us know, did that resonate? And then we've given you a whole list of amazing essential oils to help you work, to nourish the good parts of Vesta, to maybe work through some challenges that come up around Vesta as well. And that's what the essential oils, what Mother Earth is growing here, is such a beautiful gift. Whatever's happening in the heavens, Mother Earth is supporting you. We'll be back next week when we have one more big asteroid that we really want to go through. Until then, take care and blessed be.
Bye-bye.
There's a lot happening in the world right now. There's wars, there's financial pressures, there's health concerns, and all of this can be quite overwhelming. Just open up social media and you're going to be subjected with all these different things which can kind of drag you into more and more gloom. I've been reflecting on this recently, and then I think about when I just step out my own back door and immerse myself in nature. Nature helps us to find peace, harmony, and to put everything into perspective. Recently, I've wanted to try and help people to engage a bit more with nature through different gifts of nature, such as essential oils and crystals and so on. But being able to stretch out and reach people that way is often through that overwhelming social media. So I've come up with a solution. I've created a collective, a community where we can all gather and we can share our experiences with our oils, with our crystals, with nature, as the animals sing and dance and talk to us in different ways. And I'd like to invite you to join this community. It's called the Living with Nature Collective, and it is available to you to come in and interact and meet like-minded people. Our life is generated by what we give attention to, and it's time to start giving more attention to nature in a way that you're not surrounded by other barrages of information. I'd like to offer you a 7-day free trial for my new collective, and if you look at the link below, you can click today and check it out. Come in, introduce yourself, meet other people, and be able to experience live classes, pre-recorded classes, conversations, polls, work out what's happening astrologically, what crystals are the best for you right now, and have your questions answered by me and other experts as well. I'm really excited to launch this new initiative of the Living with Nature Collective, so please check out the link below, come say hi, and I look forward to seeing you.
Life moves fast. There's constant noise, urgency, and pressure, and so much happening in the world right now that can leave you feeling depressed, drained, defeated. Somewhere amongst all the noise, you feel a quiet calling within, suggesting that something is missing. Like you've drifted away from what really matters. But nature hasn't gone anywhere. She's still there, waiting for you to return. That's why the Living with Nature Collective exists. A global, interactive community of like-minded people. Your tribe. Discover how to return to living in flow with the seasons. Blossoming, shining, releasing and pausing with the land. Each week, you'll discover simple ways to connect with crystals, essential oils, astrology, the moon, animal wisdom, angels, and more. If you've been looking for something, you've found it. Step back into the garden, the forest, the ocean. Join the Living with Nature Collective today.